Good day, everyone. I'll just support myself with a phone here. And can we have the slides displayed? Perfect. So good day, everyone. My name is Michał Zubrycki, and I'm head of standards at Business Reporting Advisory Group, BRAG. It's a Poland-based company that is assisting various institutions, regulators, authorities in facilitating the exchange of electronic information through the use of digital format standards and similar aspects. I wanted to speak today about the multi-regulator taxonomy, but before we get there, I wanted to explain a few things around the data standard, digital data standards in general. Because this is actually the basis for the XBRL taxonomies and so on. So digital data standards, as we know, are quite important right now. We are seeing a lot of digitalization processes appearing around the world where the different institutions are actually implementing these digital standards to facilitate the process of exchange of information. Can we go back to the previous slide yet? Thanks to the standards, we are able to improve the transparency of the information being disclosed, improving the comparability of the information, as well as improving the overall compliance and the quality of the data. Thanks to the standards and the relevant validation mechanism, these aspects are actually allowing us to get the better quality of the data. Also, thanks to the digital standards, we are able to better align with the other international standards, like, for example, the S1, S2 from ISSB, which was presented yesterday by Dr. Ndidi. And she already explained that they applied the XBRL as a standard to allow for the exchange of this information on ESG related to the S1 and S2 standards. Next slide, please. And the digital standards in general are already proven to lower the costs of overall data management, allowing the implementers to stay competitive, to attract new entrants to the markets, and accommodate also the new data reporting scopes. Very example, ESG information, which is the subject of this conference. So one of the standards that I wanted to focus on today, and we can go to the next slide, please, is XBRL. So XBRL is Extensible Business Reporting Language, which is a format that allows the businesses to exchange electronic information related to their operations, both financial and non-financial information. It is applied globally within the different types of entities, from business registers, tax authorities, central banks, reporting entities, obviously, because they are using that to report this information to the regulators, but also auditors and investors and direct consumers. They are all using XBRL standard to get the best of the data that is being reported. Now, XBRL in general is constructed out of two main artifacts: taxonomies and instance documents, which are the electronic reports. We will not be focusing on the electronic reports, we will focus on the taxonomies. And if we go to the next slide, I wanted to explain what the actual taxonomy is, because the concept of the taxonomy, the word taxonomy is clear. This is some sort of a classification of a given information, and it actually means the same in the XBRL word. So this is basically an electronic reflection of the information requirements that are being subject to the reporting. And here on the screen, we are actually displaying the XBRL taxonomy that we did together with the CIPC, that is currently used for the purposes of annual returns reporting, as well as the annual financial statements. And as it happens, over this weekend, we will be releasing a new version for the 2023, which I hope would go smoothly. But anyways, the taxonomies are actually allowing us to document in a standardized way the information requirements that will be subject to reporting of reporting entities. They basically define the definition of business terms in a standardized way, so that the entities that will be using such taxonomies will be able to present, to create their electronic versions of the reports that will be using the same definitions across different industries, across different jurisdictions, and so on. And thanks to those common definitions, the regulators can actually take these terms and rearrange them in a way that would constitute some sort of a reporting templates that will be later on used by the reporting entities to provide their information. Thanks to the taxonomies, and we can go to the next slide, I wanted to show some use cases from Europe that are actually showcasing how the taxonomies are improving the comparability of the data, which is actually quite important. So in Europe, we have something which is called the European Single Electronic Format, ESEF, that was implemented by the European Securities and Markets Authority. That was actually agreed among all the 27 member states of the EU. And thanks to that, we managed to create a single reporting taxonomy for the annual financial statements using the IFRS standards that allowed the entities to report their financials, their primary financial statements, their explanatory notes, in the exact same way, using the same format, using the same definitions, using the same terms as defined by the taxonomy. Thanks to that standardization, later on, the investors and people that are doing relevant analytics around the data are able to compare these reports regardless on how they are actually presented visually, regardless on how the entities are actually naming their financial positions presented in the financial statements, because behind that, there is a common definition of that term. Hence, regardless on how we name these positions, whether we will be using different languages to disclose that information, behind that we will always have the same definition, which will actually improve the comparability of the data across jurisdictions, across different industries, and basically everyone will be able to benefit from that. What is actually even more interesting is the next use case that I have on the second slide, is actually the use case of Finland, where XBRL was actually taken a bit apart from the standard application of it for the financial reporting, and it was instead applied for the purposes of reporting the budgetary information by the municipalities in Finland. So all the municipalities agreed to use the standard, to define their common taxonomy, and based on that they were reporting the budgetary information, which is then presented publicly so that the citizens can actually access this information and have clear view on how the reporting is actually performed by these authorities. So this is actually another example of a fine cooperation among different types of institutions. Now getting back to South Africa, we can go to the next slide. XBRL is not something new. As you see, we are actually approaching right now almost 20 years of existence of the XBRL South Africa jurisdiction. XBRL in general is governed by the XBRL International, which is a non-profit organization, to promote the application of the standard globally. And to do it better and more specifically and more adapted to relevant jurisdictions, each jurisdiction can actually create their own jurisdiction, and this also happened in South Africa. So in 2005, the XBRL SA jurisdiction was created with the assistance of the SAICA in order to promote the standard in the country. There were already some initiatives. First one was coming actually from the JSE, where there was a taxonomy designed, I think back in 2007 or something like that, where listing requirements were actually depicted in form of the XBRL taxonomy, together with some additional information like the company secretary statement, director's report, and so on. Later on, these taxonomies were implemented and available for use. The only problem at that time was that this was only a voluntary filing, hence it didn't pin out at the very beginning. But it didn't actually prevent the country to actually progress in terms of that, because later on, and that was happening in 2014, and we can go to the next slide, please, there was an initiative that was able to define something which we call XBRL SA Standard and Governance Architecture. That was defined to promote, again, the standard across South Africa, and also was provided as an effort to actually gather all the regulators in South Africa, put them in a one table and discuss how they can actually align their implementation efforts toward introducing XBRL in the country. So thanks to that project and the output results, we managed to establish something which is called the standard architecture for how the regulators should actually create XBRL taxonomies in South Africa. And we can go to the next slide. I know that this might be slightly technical, but this actually depicts on how different regulators can actually join in this particular framework and establish their reporting requirements through the use of XBRL. And CIPC was actually the very first regulator that applied this standard, and hence you can actually see this at the slide, that on the right-hand side we already have a first, let's say, block that is actually considering the specific requirements of the CIPC. Now, this architecture is actually divided into two pieces. The one on the left, marked in blue, is called the definition layer, in which we are defining the common definition of business terms that are subject to reporting, and which are also common to the country. And then we have the right-hand side marked in green, which is the reports layer. In here, every regulator can actually include their own version or view on how these common terms that are defined in the definition layer can be used, reused, in order to create relevant and specific reporting templates for the entities to provide their data to the CIPC. We will be discussing this a bit more on the technical side at the tomorrow's session, for which I'm kindly inviting you to join us. But that concept was actually quite interesting because it was also following on the other initiatives that we notice around the world. There are two major programs called the Standard Business Reporting, something that the Commissioner was mentioning at the very beginning yesterday, which are actually gathering all the agencies within those countries, and these are Australia and Netherlands, where all of them actually sat down and were able to model their requirements in a common way, using common terms, and using the same format, which actually facilitated the reporting and removed the burden from the reporting entities, because they were reporting using one format into the one place, and then the information was actually distributed among all the regulators that were in need of certain type of the data. And this is actually something that we are aiming to achieve in South Africa as well. And CIPC was actually the very first one to kick off these works. So on the next 2 or 3 slides, we actually have a kind of a success story of the CIPC on how this actually went down, because shortly after we finalized in 2015 the production of the XBRL SA and governance structure, CIPC went live and actually requested some assistance through an RFP to find a way in terms of how to adapt to this framework and design their own taxonomy that will be providing relevant information requirements to be reported by the entity subject to reporting to the CIPC. So what was selected, the annual returns and the annual financial statements, but that was just the very beginning. So the objective of the CIPC is clear: to reduce the burden and to achieve the regulatory compliance. Thanks to application of XBRL standard and all the mechanisms that are actually attached to the standard, like validation rules and some visualization or rendering mechanism, it allowed actually to create the reports and actually drop the requirements of the PDF reporting, which is kind of looking nice, but not necessarily structured enough so that it could be easily analyzed later on, or extracting the data from that format. If we go to the next slide, the digitization program of the CIPC with the application of the XBRL taxonomy allowed to improve the data collection from the market through the reporting platform. Thanks to the analytical systems and BI systems, CIPC was allowed to to automate certain processes that were performed manually before, and hence improve the processing of the data that was gathering from the market. And also starting to provide some potential APIs that would allow others to connect to the data and later on make use of that. And if we go to the next slide, I know that the commissioner was showing some numbers yesterday. I think mine are outdated a bit, but it actually showed us how quickly the reporting was actually adapted in South Africa and how actually it was improving the quality of the data. Thanks to the validation rules, set of mandatory fields that CAPC defined to ensure at least the minimum data sets are being reported, improved the overall quality of the data. There was a better audit trail in terms of how to track the information that was reported in time between the periods. As I mentioned, there was limited effort required to analyze the data, to check the compliance, because many of these aspects were already performed in an automated manner. And it actually also CAPC was benefiting from the better completeness of the data, because in the past we were noticing some information that was missed out, either intentionally or not, but that was actually really hard to track it through a manual review of that information. There is a case study that we jointly did with Joey that you can actually access through the QR code, but if that doesn't work, we can also share the link later on. And I have one last slide before I finish, which is actually something more related to the topic of the conference, which is the ESG consideration. As we heard yesterday from Dr. Ndidi, in July, the ISSB published the proposed XBRL taxonomy that will constitute S1 and S2 reporting requirements in form of the digital taxonomy. That is right now being consulted. Actually, on Monday, they finished the consultation process, actually checking with the market on how well the taxonomy is actually depicting the standards from the business perspective, but also looking for some feedback from the technical community to ensure everything is actually addressed properly from the XBRL perspective. CAPC was from the very beginning, and I think earlier this year at the JSC, where there was the announcement of the standards, already committed to the fact that these standards, these taxonomies will actually be adapted to the CAPC taxonomy. There are, though, certain considerations that CAPC is right now in discussions around, whether this should be considered as a separate taxonomy or should be part of the existing taxonomy as a separate module. These things are still being discussed, or this is not yet clear on how this be later on proceeded with, but for sure the scope of the S1, S2 will be accommodated in the CAPC taxonomy. There are also other taxonomies on the market that are touching on the ESG market that are performed in the XBRL standard. So apart from S1 and S2, the European sustainability reporting standards are right now also being finalized in form of an XBRL taxonomy. They were recently adopted by the European Commission, so right now this is just a technical reflection that is needed of these standards. And the idea also is that the project that I was telling you about at the beginning, the ESEF, the European Securities and Markets Authority program, is actually planning to adapt the ESRSs into the ESEF framework. So they will be actually both mirroring the accounting taxonomy with the ESG data and allowing the entities to use the same format, same mechanism of information exchange to also provide the information on the ESG related aspects. Since this is the hottest topic of all the topics that are right now in the community, all the organizations, like for example XBRL International, are joining forces to produce also relevant mechanisms, new specifications that will actually facilitate the adoption of these taxonomies into the current reporting frameworks. For example, XBRL International is now having a kind of a common taxonomies in line with the ISO standards to depict the country codes, currency codes. So everything is actually being standardized, meaning that would actually highly improve the information that will be reported by the entities, and not necessarily only within a certain country, but actually globally. As we know, IFRS is quite significantly used around the globe. So using the same taxonomy will actually allow us to compare a Polish company with a company in South Africa, because we are using the same underlying XBRL taxonomy. And there is no need to understand the Polish language in order to evaluate a Polish filing, because we will be able to look at this from the perspective of the taxonomy. This is why this is so important, that others who are right now considering the application of S1, S2 standards in digital reporting of the ESG information could join into this framework, which is already mature, tested by the CIPC and proven to be working well, in order to get the best of it and to limit the effort for the reporting entities, and to also improve the comparability across the different institutions, and also to ensure that the information can be exchanged without a double reporting from the entities just to simply address or satisfy the requirements of a given institution. So the call to action is to actually start considering joining the program. We will be having a technical session tomorrow. There will be also a technical committee established for that, which will actually allow us to start rediscussing the potential here and how others can actually join into the program. Thank you. This is all from my side, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that. I think that maybe I'll take one or two questions before I call Joey to talk on the working group formations, the end game. Can I see if there are any hands for questions? There must just be brief questions. Don't go into other detail, just go straight to the point so that we know. That's my number one. Any quick last one? All right, that's the only question I'm going to take. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want clarity, maybe I might have missed it, but I also understand that the National Treasury is also working on a taxonomy, but then I note that he has identified that the CIPC is also working on a taxonomy. So just want to understand, because the National Treasury is a policymaker, are there any collaborations that are happening between the National Treasury and the CIPC? Thanks.
All right. Thank you. I'm not sure if that's a question for you, Mikael.
I can drop a few words on that.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I'm not aware on the current engagements of the National Treasury in terms of the actual development efforts, but when we were designing the XBRL SA standards and the governance framework, the NT was also participating in the discussion, and there were several approaches in terms of how the entire framework could be governed. So one of the proposals at that time would be potentially to place the NT as the governing body, but that was just one of the options at that time. I'm not sure how it developed from then, so perhaps maybe colleagues from the CIPC, or maybe we have some representatives from the National Treasury here, would be better suited to answer this question from the technical side as well.
Okay. All right.